Well, shalom. We may have caught somebody in here playing with the knobs on Christmas Eve, so Casey, it's not on you, buddy. But thank you. Good reaction. We'll edit that out. Shalom, Haverim. Hello, friends. Merry Christmas. Hope everyone's doing well. Did everybody get the things that they wanted for Christmas? You got, all right, excellent. Well, I don't know about you, but today is the second day of Christmas, so I am awaiting my, what is it, 2 turtle doves and a partridge in a pear tree? Just me? Okay. Tough crowd already. Also, speaking of trees, do you all know why Christmas trees make really bad sowers? Sowers. They keep dropping their needles. It's not going to get any better. That's why you get a fake Christmas tree. That's right. I have called my sermon today the First Noel. And I've realized that I am like 41 years old, and so this is my 41st time hearing this story, singing this song, and all this time I had no idea what the word Noel meant. Anybody here know what Noel means? I'm looking at somebody here because I know she speaks French, but I won't put you on the spot, though. Noel is simply the French word for Christmas. It comes from an Old English word, and that Old English word comes from a Latin word, which means birthday. So First Noel is really just the first Christmas. And I did a little more research, and I did a little more looking into the etymology, the origins of this word. And it actually goes all the way back to the 1st century when Mary and Joseph were traveling to the city of David. And I found actual footage, a still picture of them arriving in the city. So here you have it, the real story behind the First Noel. Oh boy. I had a couple more worked in there, but you know what? We'll just go with that one. The First Noel. Well, today we're going to be talking about the First Noel. We're going to be talking about the first Christmas. And I was speaking with a friend of mine yesterday and just talking about Christmas services. And he just noted that it's got to be hard to preach on Christmas Sunday because I said I've heard this story 41 times in my life. You've heard it however many times you've gone around the sun. This is nothing new to you. So the person asked me, my friend asked me, like, how do you say anything new on Christmas Day? And I realized, well, maybe I don't have to. Maybe it's not my job to say something new today. Maybe my job is simply to say what you've heard for however many times you've been around the sun. Just to repeat that story and maybe emphasize a few things, maybe shed a little new light here and there. So what we're going to do today is we're going to walk through this story. We're going to see how maybe it's been misrepresented, how I think we should probably understand this story, and how this relates to us here today. So we'll do that. We'll keep it relatively short today because it is still the Christmas holiday, and I know you have lots of fruitcake to get home to and eat, right? No? Okay. All right, so first thing that I think about when I think about this story, this first Noel, is I think about this beautiful image that we see here today. This is just your standard run-of-the-mill nativity scene. You've got the angels overhead. The star is shining down upon Mary and Joseph. We have here, I think, one wise man. We have shepherds gathered around Mary and Joseph. They're just beaming with joy. Their faces are literally shining with joy. It seems to be like light radiating off Jesus there in the stable, in the manger. Even the animals are kind of bowing down before him. And you look at Mary, she's all clean. Her robe has been pressed, and it's nice and tidy, and her hair is all brushed, and it looks lovely in this scene. And I think about this scene. This is what comes to my mind when I think of the first Noel. And if I ask you about songs, if I ask this group here today, maybe just call it out. What are your favorite Christmas songs, your favorite hymns? O Little Town of Bethlehem. Silent Night. How many people would say Silent Night? Raise your hand. Like a lot of people are going to say, Silent Night's one of my favorite as well. And I think about this scene, and I think about Silent Night, and then I think about when my children were born. Now, I know some of you weren't able to be in the room when your children were born. I was able to be there as part of being in this generation. Your fathers were expected to be in the room for the delivery. And I remember all of the screaming, all of the crying that took place that night. And that was just me. Right? There was screaming, there was crying, there was blood, there's amniotic fluid. I don't even know what amniotic fluid is, but it was there. Paxton comes into the world screaming at 8:16 on a Saturday, and I just remember that night, like we decided I'm going to spend the night there at the hospital. Some of you have been there. They've got those really short little couches that are called sleeper sofas. I don't know who calls them sleeper sofas because you don't do much sleeping there. I remember every 2 hours that nurse coming in, and what she would do is she would flip on the lights and say, "Time to feed the baby." It's the voice that I have in my head. She was probably a very lovely woman. She's just doing her job. Every 2 hours she brings the baby in. We did not get much sleep that night or for several nights to follow. It was anything but a silent night. There was a lot of dirtiness, a lot of grossness, a lot of things you can't unsee. And my apologies to anybody who's got a queasy stomach. One of the first things I remember that caught me off guard, I remember, Sonia gave birth to this child. They take him over to start cleaning him up. She goes over to shower, and then the next thing that happens is the guy comes in with a mop and bucket. Like it's messy, it's dirty, it's loud. So I think about this story here and the way we have sanitized it. And as much as I love this image, as much as I love singing Silent Night, I realize that if Jesus was truly a human, and I think that he was, God in human flesh, that it was anything but this sanitized version. I want to see a picture of Mary all disheveled, her hair all a muss, probably trying to catch up on some sleep after a long night of labor. She's just been traveling, like she just came from another city. She's traveled in and gave birth as soon as she got there. The woman's going to be tired. I want to see a picture of Joseph, forking up the straw after things have kind of been messy there. I want to see just the dirtiness of all that happened here, because that would be really real. And I think there's something even more beautiful about that image than what we have here. As much as I like this, the real grit and dirtiness of it is something beautiful in and of itself as well. Well, let's walk through this story and let me shed some light on what might have actually happened that day. So if you look at this story, this was found in Luke's gospel. Luke tells the story and so does Matthew, but they tell it slightly different. They emphasize different aspects of the story. You look at the way Luke begins it, and I think Luke, he's telling this story for a certain reason. He's trying to situate Jesus' birth on a timeline. He's also trying to explain something. We look at this passage and we see first this. He begins by saying, "In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree." The next verse he says, "This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria." The only reason any of this matters is because he's trying to put a date to when Jesus was born. And it's actually because of this information we also add the passage from Matthew. Matthew says in chapter 2:1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, it's because of this information we know that Jesus wasn't born in the year 1, because King Herod died in the year 4 BC. So we can kind of better situate when Jesus was born. And I just want to back up. It sounds like I'm being critical when I tell you that Jesus was actually born 4 BC. But let's be honest, guys, if we're going to guess our spouse's birthday, we're doing pretty well if we come within 4 years, right? So somebody, I think it was monks, sat around and they tried to make this calendar up. They did pretty well to guess within 3 or 4 years here. So when Luke gives all this information, he's situating this within a timeline. This is what's happening in the world. Probably the most important thing to Luke was to show why Jesus was even in Bethlehem. He's describing all of these events because here's this family in Nazareth. For some reason, or she's 9 months pregnant, they get up and they move to Bethlehem. So what Luke is doing here, he's situating this on the timeline, telling us why this Nazarene family is even in Bethlehem. They're in the city because the whole world was to be taxed. And to be taxed, there has to be a census. But I also think there's some other things that I can gather from this information right here that is helpful for us to understand the world into which Jesus was born. First thing that I notice when I read these verses is I look at who these people were. Caesar Augustus. Caesar was the most powerful man in the whole world at the time. Nobody more powerful than Caesar. First century Rome, he was the leader of the Roman Empire. Below him was a governor, Governor Quirinius of Syria, a very important, a very powerful individual. And also in Matthew's gospel, we read about King Herod. Herod was kind of a puppet king of the Romans, but he was still considered the king. So we look at this list of who all was listed at the very beginning of these chapters. They're big, important, powerful people. And this is how Luke begins the story of Christmas. So what I want you to do is kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Can you remember that? This is how Luke begins his story. But let's jump ahead to see how he ends the story. Now we come to verse 8 and we find a different group of people. In verse 8 we find this. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. Now there's some debate among scholars about just who these people were. But it's kind of commonly known that shepherds weren't necessarily the cleanest people. They lived out among the sheep. And if you deal with animals all the time, before there was things like running water, you kind of had a smell about you. Even sometimes, even today, when you do live around running water, if you live around animals a lot, you can have this smell. You just can't get it off you. These shepherds were known to be dirty. Sometimes they had this identity that they were kind of thieves, and they would go into town and they would steal things. They're just a rough group. But the scholars differ on just who was watching the sheep that night. Some scholars will say these were obviously hired men, because the shepherds themselves wouldn't be up late at night watching the sheep. It was the people that they hired that watched the sheep by night. So if you know anything about hired men, first of all, you have these shepherds. They maybe weren't real high on the social totem pole, but at least they had livestock, so they had some clout among the rest of the world. But you have the hired men, and sometimes those people can be a little bit rough. So I'm just getting back from a trip to Ohio. We were in Ohio from Monday through Thursday morning. And like much of the world, Ohio is seeing a labor shortage. We're seeing that around here as well, right? You can't go somewhere without seeing a now hiring sign. So we're in Ohio, and I remember we went to CVS one point, and there's 2 people running the entire store because they had several people quit. They just didn't want to work anymore. It's just extremely busy. If you can't find people to work at a place like CVS where you have regular hours and a relatively clean job, you can imagine that some of the rougher, dirtier kind of jobs are all the more difficult to find people to work. So I grew up in dairy country. My parents still have a dairy farm, and you can bet that farm labor is extremely difficult to come by, especially the people that have the dirtiest of jobs, the people that are milking the cows, the people that are feeding the calves. It's extremely challenging right now to find workers. And I remember when I was growing up that some of these guys that we did have working on the farm weren't necessarily the kind of people that you would have over for Sunday dinner. There were people that were kind of dirty, and I can't even remember. I asked my mom sometime, ask her how many times she had to bail somebody out of jail just so they could get back to milk cows for their shift that evening. We even had one guy, I think I'm remembering the story right. My mom will check me on this tomorrow. We had one guy even that he was scheduled to milk one weekend, And he made up this elaborate story about how his daughter died in a car accident. He lied straight up to my parents, told them his daughter had died in a car accident. And he had this big story about how nice the tombstone was and everything like that. And my mom's not one to call anybody out, but she said later, she's like, I know that they don't engrave those overnight. She's like, I know this guy is lying to me. What do you do? And it was weeks later that daughter miraculously rose from the grave because she arrived at his house and stayed with him for a couple weeks. But these were the kinds of people that we had working for us. So these were the hired men in Ohio. And you look at these shepherds, these were the hired men probably working, watching the sheep at night. But what does the story tell us? As these hired men are out there watching the sheep by night, the angels show up before them and they start singing, "Glory to God in the highest." These rough dudes, these guys that, if we're not saying that all hired men are rough dudes, but like they might have been rough dudes. They might have been liars. They might have been people who needed to get bailed out of jail every now and then. And I love this picture. It's kind of abstract, and I'm not sure if those are rocks or sheep down there. But you see the angels just showing up to them and proclaiming to this rough group of dudes, Jesus is born. So you look at this story. Who's the first one to receive the message that Jesus is born? It's the shepherds. And then the shepherds go to Jesus. Who's the first one to visit Jesus in the stable? It's the shepherds, the hired men. And then there they receive this message and they go out and they tell other people, today the Christ child has been born. Who becomes the first evangelist? It's the shepherds. God chose to enter into this world and to reveal himself first, not to Caesar, not to Quirinius the governor, not even to Herod the king of the Jews. He first reveals himself, makes himself known to the shepherds. And that makes me rethink how I have processed and thought about these hired men all of my life. I've been way too quick to judge them. Because if Jesus judged them as worthy of receiving the good news, then who am I to say anything different? And not only does Jesus decide that these people are worthy of his message, notice the place that this happens. Okay, so if something great would be happening, if the King of the Jews was to come to the world today, where would you expect him to show up? Washington, D.C.? I don't know, some London, England? Visit the Queen, right? Don't mean to put words in your mouth. But if the king's going to show up, he's going to go see the Queen, right? He should at least pay homage to the Queen. No? I don't know. Work with me here, Roger. My Christmas gift, work with me. Yes, thank you. He doesn't go to visit Caesar, the most powerful person in the world. He doesn't go to visit Quirinius. He doesn't go to Jerusalem. I mean, look at the wise men. Do you remember where the wise men first stop on their way through? They stop in Jerusalem because that's the place where all things Jewish happen, at the temple. And they have to be told, no, you're not right. You need to go over here to this little town, Bethlehem. So I sum it all up like this. Jesus' birth is first announced to shepherds, not to Caesar, not the governor, not even to Herod. And Jesus is born in Bethlehem, this little podunk town, not Jerusalem, not Rome, not New York, not London, not Washington, D.C. So what does that mean to us? I think that means that even though this is messy, even though this is dirty, even though the images that we have, the songs that we sing sometimes sanitize this event, I think that the Christmas story shows us that God isn't afraid of our messiness. That God chooses to enter into our messiness, into our hurting, into our brokenness, and live here among us. Now, I told this story several years ago. I'm going to repeat it now because I think it's appropriate. It's a little bit strong, but work with me here. It's a story that comes from an author. His name is is Elie, and I don't know exactly how you pronounce his last name. I think I've heard it said Elie Wiesel or Wiesel. I'll say Elie Wiesel because that's easier for me to say. My apologies to the Wiesel family if you're watching this on Facebook right now. They're not. But one person is. All right, so Elie Wiesel is an author. He wrote a book called Night, and he is originally a Romanian Jewish man. He passed away in 2016, and he was captured along with his family by the Nazis, and they were taken away to 2 different concentration camps. Wiesel himself lived in 2 different concentration camps. He saw his own father killed by the Nazis in that camp. So in the book Night, Wiesel retells this story about seeing a public execution in one of these concentration camps. And public executions weren't uncommon in those situations. He does. I don't even recall what the punishment was, but there were 3 people to be executed on this one day. And the reason for a public execution is in part to intimidate people, because you see the people dying. The Jewish people, the prisoners, had to line up and watch the entire event take place. And by doing that, it intimidated them. You don't mess with us, or this will happen to you as well. But this one was different because this event took place with 2 adult male members of the prisoner group, but also 1 child. Yes, 1 child was executed publicly, hung by the neck until dead that day. And understandably, a number of the Nazis were even like pushing back and saying, we aren't going to do this. They had to find a special person, especially evil, I guess, to even put the noose around the neck of this child. Now, as these 3 individuals, the 2 men and the child, are lined up, ready to be hung, the Jewish people are there watching, and obviously they're upset by this. And they just start calling out, God, come down. God, help us. God, help us. Free this young man. Free these people. And the 2 grown-up men, they're hung by the neck, and they die almost instantly. But this young child was so light that he didn't die right away. That he hung there by his neck for about 30 minutes, passing from life to death and back again. And the people were forced to sit there and watch this entire event unfold. And after 30 minutes, Wiesel recalls hearing a voice call out behind him, God, where are you? Where is God in the midst of all of this? It was in that moment that he heard a voice inside his own head say, well, God's right there. God is up there in the gallows with those men and that boy. Now, there's 2 different ways that this story has been interpreted. Some people have said, well, what Wiesel is doing is he's explaining his own loss of religion. Right there and then, as he saw that boy suffering, he decided that God must have died with them because God is not present. God is not alive. There is no God to Wiesel. But other people have read this passage, and they've read his later works and said, no. It's clear that throughout his work, throughout his life, God was very much a part of who he was. God was very much a part of his writings. So this interpretation, which I like and I prefer, says that when Wiesel heard that voice that said to him, God is there in the gallows, this interpretation says that when people are suffering, when people are hurting the most, when people experience these atrocities, God isn't absent. God isn't dead. God isn't removed from all of that. God is right there with us. In the 4th chapter of Hebrews, we hear this story, these words about how Jesus experienced everything that we've ever experienced. The author of Hebrews says that through Jesus, God has experienced all we experience, the pain, the suffering. I mean, does that story of the gallows remind you of any other stories? The pain, the suffering, the betrayal that we've experienced, the rejection, the loss. You know, Jesus had his best friends reject him. One of them even betrayed him, turned him over to the enemy. Most of them scattered. One of them claimed to not even know him at his worst hour. Through Jesus, God knows everything that we've been through. And this is why I think the Christmas story is so important. And it's so important that we get it right. Because Jesus didn't just come to this world and live among the social elite, the rich and the powerful. No, he came and he was literally born in a barn, laid in a manger, because there's no crib for a bed. And his first visitors weren't socialites. They weren't dignitaries. They weren't rich and powerful men. It was a bunch of hired hands that were just out back watching their sheep. And they were the first evangelists. And look at the family that Jesus was born into. It wasn't a powerful family, a power family. It was people of no reputation, no means, no background. It was a carpenter and a 14-year-old woman. This is how God enters the world. And that's how we know that God is with us today. God enters into our suffering. God enters into our pain. And God redeems it. Now, one of the things about being a pastor is that I know stories about all of you. And I can hold it against you if I have to. That'll come in handy one of these days. Oh, I've got stories about you. No, that's not what I mean. The thing I mean by that is I know that everybody here has your own stuff, your own junk, your own brokenness. I mean, we're just coming off of Christmas. You probably have stories. Like, you probably spent time with Uncle Billy. Anybody have an Uncle Billy? Gary does. Well, this is a fictional Uncle Billy. Maybe you just spent time with Uncle Billy, and Uncle Billy just doesn't pick up on the fact that it's no longer okay to tell racist or sexist jokes. He just keeps dropping them one after another. Or maybe you just spent time with your brother who can't even wait until the Christmas ham comes out of the oven to start complaining about politics and pontificating his ideas. Maybe you have that niece or the nephew that's brought like their 7th or 8th wife to the Christmas party, and you start calling them by the wrong names. Am I the only one? We all have brokenness in our world. We all have brokenness in our life. And the good news that we see in the Christmas story is that God doesn't avoid the ugliness. God doesn't avoid the brokenness. God comes right down, smack dab in the middle of it, and loves us and redeems us anyway. The Christmas story is a lot of things. But to me, I think the Christmas story, more than anything else, tells us about the character of God. We have a God who loves us so much that he's willing to come down and enter into our brokenness, enter into the fallenness of this world, to live a perfect life in order to redeem us, to redeem our lives. That's how much God loves us. That's how much God cares for this world. Will you please join me in prayer? Loving God, we give you thanks for all that you've done, for entering into this world on Christmas time, and doing so not just for the social elite or the powerful or the rich. Lord, you first came to this world as a child of poor, everyday, blue-collar workers. And Lord, you have chosen to first reveal yourself to other people who seem to have problems and challenges as well. Lord, you haven't avoided the brokenness. You haven't broken the ugliness. You have come right into it to redeem it. And for that, we give you thanks. In Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen. Well, the song that I've chosen for today